and will put the Department of Justice of the United States back in the business of justice. We will double the Civil Rights Division and direct law enforcement to counter this extremism. We will hold social media platforms accountable for the hate infiltrating their platforms, because they have a responsibility to help fight against this threat to our democracy. And if you profit off of hate, if you act as a megaphone for misinformation or cyber warfare, if you don't police your platforms, we are going to hold you accountable as a community.
Boy, oh boy. I feel like there's an operation being ran to convince me to vote for Donald Trump, and it's being led by Kamala Harris, his opponent. Good God. Good God. Doubling the Civil Rights Division, not great in its own right, but then extrapolate to basically doubling and tripling down on what the Biden administration did from 2020 to today when it comes to pressuring big tech, social media to do their bidding in terms of censorship when it comes to hate speech and all this nonsense. Man, I'm speechless. I'm blown away. The brazen nature of it, that you're just going to continue to pretend as if these aren't private institutions that are allowed to allow us to speak freely. With mis and disinformation and hate speech, and you're going to be held to account by the community. Hey, I'm part of the community. Don't want you doing that. Is that a possibility? I'd really appreciate it if you didn't. In fact, it's a violation of the Constitution. Do you care? Certainly not. Certainly not. This woman's a nightmare. Like a genuine walking, talking nightmare. I am scared by her. And I know I've had this kind of debate between myself, Dave Smith, and James Lindsay as to, what are her actual principles. I think she's really this. I do. The way she talks about that, especially like when she gets into lawyer mode, when she's just doing her normal, campaign spiel, I think she's just telling you whatever her campaign advisors tell her to say. When she's talking as an attorney, though, when she starts to talk about how she's going to we're going to bring justice back to the justice system and all this, and we're going to apply pressure to the big tech platforms, that sounds like attorney Kamala Harris. And attorney Kamala Harris is a lunatic. That's the most scary version of her, and I think it's also the most sincere version of her, which is the scariest part about all of this. I think that's actually who she is. I think she is actually a tyrant. I really do. And I think she would really weaponize the presidency, the executive branch, and therefore the judicial branch with her appointments, and the DOJ. Like, does she seem as if she's just working off of cue cards there to you, or does she seem as if she's cross-examining somebody? Because it seems like a cross-examination to me, and it is not an act. So I don't know. I still don't know what I'm going to do with Donald Trump. I don't know. I'm still deciding. But my God, this woman has to lose. She absolutely has to lose. This is dangerous beyond words. If you go back and watch it again, go back and watch it and listen to it again. Can that woman be the president of the United States? Even Joe Biden doesn't usually sound that bad, that dangerous, that overt, that tyrannical. My God. All right. Got a great episode for you today. I did an interview with Jeremy Ryan Slate on the kind of comparing and contrasting the Roman Empire, Republic era to the American Empire and where we're at in that cycle and what it means for us moving forward. I found it to be totally fascinating. I'm quite the novice when it comes to Roman history. So it was great to have a guy who actually has a college degree in it and knows it inside and out. And I got to really press him to make these comparisons to modern times so that we might actually be able to learn from the history of that era and the lessons of that era and extrapolate them forward and see how they might assist us in modern times with the modern problems and the modern empire that we languish under. I think you're going to love this one. I really do. And if you do, share it around. But before you get into the interview, please do hit the like button. Leave reviews on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else, Spotify. and subscribe. I really appreciate you guys. The episode I did yesterday is going pretty viral, and seems like you guys liked it, and I hope you could tell the sincerity with which I delivered it. So anytime an episode goes viral, I always appreciate it, and thank you guys for tuning in as always. Let's get in the interview with Jeremy Ryan Slate. Vladimir Putin's check of rubles has just cleared, and I am now cleared for takeoff with my new guest today. Jeremy Ryan Slate, what's up, brother? How are you doing?
Hey, man, it's funny because I know before we started recording here, The Guardian put up this story where they're trying to talk about the Tenet Media story.
Yep.
And they were trying to talk about Tim, and they put up some random dude in a beanie as Tim Pool, and it's like, what are people on crack?
This is high-level journalism, ladies and gentlemen. Let's... where is it at? Here we go. This is too funny.
I was dying, and so I commented on Luke's of it, and I'm like, is that Tim from the future? Can we find out if graphene's actually a thing?
we could really help Ian Crossland calm down if he knows that graphene becomes a big technology. Yeah, that's Dave Rubin, that's Benny Johnson, and then in the middle there, that's Tim Pool.
Who is that guy?
I have no idea. It's incredible. Anyways, yeah, we don't have to talk about that. I covered it on my show late last night, and it's actually airing as you and I are talking to each other right now. So I give my whole rundown, but I think that the more pertinent issue is our debasing currency. And I had you on Best Political Show with Luke and I, and we were talking about this a little bit. And I'm just curious, for my audience's sake, Austrian economics guys, libertarian guys, sound money, hard money guys, we're always intrigued by the corollaries between Rome, the fall of Rome, and the American Empire, and what phase of it we are in, so we can kind of plan accordingly based off of historical precedent. I think given the derivatives markets, the global nature of the economy, you're not going to have a direct cognate. Like the similarities are going to stop at some point, and it's going to be a leap of faith, kind of a guessing game.
Sure.
But I do think we can learn lessons from history, certainly. Tucker Carlson and Daryl Cooper got in trouble for talking about history and extrapolating lessons moving forward.
That was an interesting interview, though, if you got a chance to listen to the whole thing.
It was great. It was great. I had no problem with it whatsoever.
Well, you know what I struggle with that, Clint? Because the same way people talk about Julius Caesar, I think people, for some reason, when they look back on history, they want to put people on one team, like good guy, bad guy.
Exactly.
And I think when you look at a lot of us, we're kind of like a kaleidoscope of our different life events, and sometimes we do some really bad stuff, and sometimes we do some really good stuff. Like Hitler wasn't a great guy, but I can guarantee he probably saved a kitten at some point in time. You know what I mean? I think
Right.
I think when you look at it, like we're a lot of gray areas.
Yeah. Well, and are we allowed to have nuance when it comes to these, not just these stories, but people broadly? And I think, obviously, when it comes to anybody that you know in your personal life, it's okay to have that nuance. But when it comes to these historical figures, to have that same level of nuance and caution in, casting the hardest judgment possible, you're immediately demonized. And I think that the reason is that it is first, it's part of war propaganda, which if you run afoul of that, you've done something terribly wrong. But also it's the foundational myth, like this is the logic by which all of our warfare has been waged since then, more or less, or a huge percentage of it. You have to stop them there so that we don't have to fight them over here. That's the whole appeasement. That's the whole Chamberlain line. Very frustrating. I hope that people are waking up and that they're rejecting this, and that they're watching that interview and they're actually going, "Oh yeah, wow, the Dresden and Tokyo firebombing campaigns, pretty fucked up."
Yeah.
Can we just be honest about that? Like, pretty fucking crazy.
Well, even you look at the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like, okay, we ended the war, but because we pushed a country into apathy. You know what I mean? I think that's, you have to look at results versus actions as well.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, results versus actions. Let's do it. I mean, where should we start? Where do you start mentally when you think about the Roman Empire versus America?
So, interestingly enough, as you mentioned, I did Best Political Show with you and Luke, which I appreciate it, by the way, because you guys changed the day of time for me and everything, our time of day and everything, just to make it work.
No biggie, dude.
I was in Miami for a very limited point of time, and then I actually ran right from you guys before you even done to the airport. So thanks for that. But you and I got talking on there about Ron Paul and how he talks about a gold standard. And oftentimes, it could be the thing that fixes a lot of things, but the guy that does it is going to be not so good of a guy historically initially, right? Because in order to fix things, you got to kind of break them a little bit. We're so far over the skis with inflation. So you kind of sent me down a rabbit hole, man. I read like 4 books since then. I've listened to a bunch of podcasts. I actually was watching this video about Constantine's monetary policy before we got in here today. And I actually learned a lot about the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire that people don't consider. Because I think oftentimes we look about the myth we're told is the fall of the West, barbarian invasions, and there's so many more shades and parts to that than you realize than we're told historically. But the part that nobody really discusses, what I think is very interesting, is Constantine is emperor in the East, right? And the East and the West start to divide after about 280. He's the emperor from 305 to, I think, 330 or something, like somewhere around that time period. So he's kind of very...
AD, right?
AD, yeah. Anno Domini. He's one of the last remaining emperors to rule over a united empire of East and West. He's going to have it united for a while, and then it's going to break up to East and West again. Theodosius is going to do something similar in the 370s. It's going to break up again. And then one more time, Justinian's going to try and put it back in the 550s, but he's going to burn it down in order to put it back together, and it just doesn't really work. So the East survives a lot longer than the West. The East being where Constantinople, which is now Turkey, and a lot of these areas are now. It survives for a couple different reasons that we know historically. A richer tax base, it's harder to invade Constantinople, and it just doesn't have the push of the barbarians from the north. But here's the thing that I was reading a book. Oh, crap, I'm going to have to get the title for you, so give me a second here. I was reading a book after our discussion, and it was called... Bear with me here, Clint. I should have been ready for this.
No problem.
It was called The Roman Empire in Crisis, 248 to 260 by Paul Pearson. And he tells a story that I have never heard before, which sent me down a rabbit hole.
Nice.
In about somewhere between 314 and 315 AD, Constantine, he'd become emperor around 312 or 313, in a city called Trier, Germany, mints gold coins. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting, because Rome had always been on a gold standard of a coin called the Aurelius. But the Aurelius over time, because other money is inflated, it starts to lose value. People start hoarding that Aurelius. And Diocletian, right before Constantine, is going to introduce a coin called the Solidus, which is the new gold coin. But it's not really widely picked up, and they have this giant inflation problem. So what Constantine does is he mints around 100 gold Solidus coins, which are 24 karat gold, pure gold, and he will continue to do that every year until he dies in the mid-330s. So what he actually does from a period of time is he takes the Eastern Empire from a fiat currency standard to a gold standard. And that currency, that golden Solidus is going to last from around 314, 315 to around the year 1000 without inflation at 24 karat gold. That's an obnoxious amount of time. And if you look at it, the East is going to fall in 1453 to the Ottomans, but it's on a very steep downward spiral the last 400 or 500 years, which coincides a lot with the East being on a gold standard and eventually being off of that gold standard.
Interesting. Well, you said that he was only minting 100 per year. Is that right?
Well, initially the first year it's 100 a year, and it gets to be more and more every year. So I don't know the exact amount after year one. Because here's the problem, right? When you look at Rome's third century, so we're talking like the year 200 to 300 AD. The problem they have is they have this massive inflation problem. They have this massive immigration problem, and one feeds the other, right? As you're bringing in more people, well, the money gets inflated. So by 284 AD, you have 15,000% inflation. So that causes a few things. It's going to cause people to start hoarding gold. So it gets very, very hard to find gold coins because when people get them, they're not giving them out. They're holding on to them. So that's one part of it.
That would be deflationary.
Yeah.
I mean, that would drive up the value of that currency, I would imagine.
But people weren't trading it. They were still trying to trade in other things, and it was driving the black market was another thing. So people were getting gold, and they were sitting on it, so they weren't using it. Yeah. So that's a major issue. And there was no new gold coming into Roman territory because Rome was no longer conquering. After 117 AD under Trajan, they stopped expanding. So there's no new money coming into Rome. And as you start to get weak rulers in the 3rd century, the barbarian invasions are having more gold leave Rome. So you're having this very valuable thing that nobody's spending and people are just sitting on, and they're just running wild with this silver coin called the denarii, and they're adding other metals to it, so it's losing value dramatically.
Right. Right, they're debasing it. And
Correct.
when you said they were losing gold to the barbarians, is that via pillaging?
It's via pillaging, because the 3rd century is kind of an interesting time period. Because if you look at it, there's a lot of different things that happen, but weak leadership is one of the major things that caused the problem. After the death of Marcus Aurelius' son, Commodus, you have a series of weak rulers leading to what's called the crisis of the 3rd century. And that's basically that military factions are raising up their general to be the new emperor, and these emperors are now fighting each other. So what's then happening is they need more troops, so they're bringing more barbarians off the provinces, and they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling the pay of those people to be able to get them to fight in the army. So they're driving up inflation dramatically. You now have people that are also hoarding gold. You have barbarians now stealing gold because there's no central power to stop them. So it's a kind of a crazy time period, and this is when everybody thought Rome was actually falling. It kind of stabilizes a little bit in the West, and you're going to get another 150 years until 476. But you have this inflation problem, which drives very, very hard. And Constantine, as I mentioned, by bringing in gold a little bit every year, manages to actually create this gold standard and stabilize the East, which saves it.
That's fascinating. And what constitutes the East and the West for those that are not wonky Rome historians?
Yeah, I apologize. So if you look at the Roman Empire, it's huge. It goes all the way from Britain in the west to all the way well past Turkey in the east. So you have a lot of it's massive. And 117 AD, as I mentioned, is its largest point under Trajan, and it's never going to be that large again. But if you look at your divide, it's somewhere that's a little bit to the west of modern day Istanbul, or what used to be Constantinople. So it would be everything east of that point is the Eastern Empire. Everything west of that is around the Western Empire. So you have this enormous empire of the East and the West. Now, Diocletian is the one that kind of creates this official divide in the 280s. Because he creates a system called the Tetrarchy, because the thing was kind of too big for one person to rule. Tetrarchy meaning rule by 4, but it really just ends up being dividing by 2, because it ends up being too much of a power struggle to have 4 emperors, and just having 2 really makes the whole thing function better.
So it should be biarchy in reality.
In reality, because the Tetrarchy doesn't really last. What he tries to do is have 2 junior emperors and 2 senior emperors, but the system just doesn't really work.
Interesting. Well, I obviously am constantly just trying to extrapolate these lessons to America, because to me, that's what matters most. I'm trying to keep this empire from falling, because I live here and everybody that I love lives here too. So where are we in your opinion in that arc? Like, are we 250? Are we 1000 AD? Like, what do you think?
So I think here's the issue, Clint, is if you look at it, when you look at Rome, it's essentially, and I'm talking about in the West when I refer to Rome, because though the people in the East would have called themselves Romans, we call it Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire in order to distinguish it, because it becomes a lot more Greek than Italian is kind of the main difference between them. But when people traditionally refer to Rome, they're referring to kind of the classic Western Empire. It has 3 eras in time. In 753 BC, it's founded as a kingdom. It lasts till 509 BC as that kingdom. Then it's a republic from 509 BC to 31 BC, and an empire from 31 BC to 476. So these are kind of your 3 eras in time.
Gotcha.
And if you look at Rome, the republic and the empire fall for very different reasons. The republic falls because there's about 100 years of civil war leading to its end, but not civil war how we think of it, right? Like of one class versus the other or something like that. This is really just rich people fighting in the streets for who's in control of the empire.
Today's episode of Liberty Lockdown is once again brought to you by our friends over at landofbiltong.com. This is the best. I'm not supposed to call it jerky. I don't care. It's South African beef jerky. It's better than American beef jerky. It's better than any beef jerky I've ever had. It's phenomenal. If you are on a low carb diet, if you're on just trying to up your protein, have a healthier snack that doesn't bog you down, this is the place to go. Landofbiltong.com. Anton is a great guy. He's an entrepreneur based out of Texas, and this dude is a savage. Opened this business during the 2020 era, migrated from a restaurant to carry out to direct to consumer, and it's just a fantastic product. I think it's going to go nationwide and become a household name. I really do. It's that good. It's that delicious. You're going to love it. If you use the promo code LOCKDOWN. You can get free shipping. And for sales that exceed $46, if you use LOCKDOWN10, you'll get 10% off. So it's the best deal in the game. Life's too short for average. Landofbiltong.com.
Right. That's really what ends up happening.
So Game of Thrones.
Right. And Caesar just ends up being the one that's smarter than the other ones and outlasts everybody else. And interestingly enough, if you ever get a chance to read about Cato the Younger, who's kind of the enemy of Caesar through his whole career, he's this guy that thinks we have to end democracy in order to save it. A lot of what he does...
Oh, Kamala Harris.
Yeah, a lot of what he does creates the situation that Caesar's going to walk into, which I think is very, very interesting. But that's really what happens, is the breakdown of rule of law. They're no longer honoring term limits, and generals are just deciding, I'm going to take this army and be in charge. So that's really why the Republic falls. If you look at why the Empire falls, Edward Gibbon, who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he lists about 200 different reasons. There's really two core ones, if you want to look at it that way. The first being immigration, and the second being inflation. If you don't have a sound currency, you don't have a country. You don't have borders, you don't have a country. And that's kind of exactly what the Western Empire runs into.
Well, now, Tucker Carlson talks about that a lot.
I've been trying to get a chance to talk to Tucker about this. I think he'd find this very interesting. But anyway,
for sure.
I think where we are is kind of early in like the 220s, if you want to look at it that way. Things really get bad around 238, which is what starts the official 3rd century crisis. But I think if you want to look at where America is in that timeline, we're kind of at the end of, things aren't going so well. We realize the people in charge aren't really in charge. Our money's a little bit out of control, but it's not at 15,000% inflation yet.
Right.
So I think the point is, if we kind of realize where we are on that game board, we can actually do something about it. And Clint, sure, it starts with borders, but the number one thing, and that's why I wanted to discuss this with you, is monetary policy, man. If we don't handle that, we have nothing.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the similarities are there, too, because we are, despite protestations from our media and political apparatus, we are very much an empire. I mean, we are the policemen of the world. We're probably the grandest empire in human history, if you actually think about it, because basically no other country has actual autonomy over itself, or it has less than full autonomy thanks to United States Navy and Marine Corps and, and our State Department and our CIA. And if you go against us, you probably aren't going to rule very long. So we're really an empire, but it's not as aggressive in nature. We certainly don't, rape and pillage our way across the world quite the way old barbarian hordes may have, but we are very, very much interested in conquest, and we've done so in, I guess, probably the I don't want to say a kinder way, but maybe kinder. I don't know. Anyways,
it's economic conquest now. I think that's what it is. If you read a lot of John Perkins's work, who wrote kind of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, it's sure it's kind of America's the vehicle, but the kind of the banks and the global economic organizations are kind of the ones running everything, right? Like you lend a bunch of money to a country's sovereign wealth fund. They spend all that money, and all of a sudden you own that country. Well, how is that much different than conquest? We're just not killing anybody.
Yeah, well, and then we may kill people if it comes to it. if you don't pay us back, which we've seen that a few times. Hello, Libya, Gaddafi. Hello, Saddam Hussein, Iraq. There's a lot of people, but. Before we get into the monetary side of things, which all of my libertarian audience is chomping at the bit to hear us talk about, let's talk a little bit about the immigration issue. I've delved deep into this. It does appear to me to be a United Nations driven agenda in America. This may be outside of your specialty, so feel no need to
I won't make it up if I don't know anything.
Exactly. feel no need to fill in the spaces here, but hundreds of millions of dollars are spent, if not billions. Actually, it is billions of dollars are spent through the U.S. taxpayer, is then sent to the UN. The UN and the World Economic Forum the UN is the funding source for many of these NGOs and these religious organizations that then assist migrants in their process of getting from wherever they are in the entire world, and they get them into America, and they do so. I think many of the religious people that are participating in it do it out of genuine, religious fervor that they want to help the downtrodden and help the poor and help the third world.
Well, because look at it realistically, do we really want to see anyone suffering? Right? And I think that's the position you're going to be in. You want to have compassion.
Yeah, and I think those people are doing it out of the better nature of their hearts, but it doesn't change the fact that if you have tens of millions of people over a handful of years come into America, that's a big demographic shift. Like, it's just true. And when you have a huge social safety net, that creates major financial problems. So I think it's doomed to fail, and I think that it's also ultimately a global government plot against the American people, and it'll ultimately be our downfall. But setting that aside, what was the immigration issue in the Roman times that really screwed them up?
So it's kind of a can of worms. So kind of, I guess, bear with me here as we kind of
Sure.
paint this picture, because there's a lot to it. And I think that the thing you have to look at first and foremost is one of the most valuable things to have in the ancient world was Roman citizenship. It was very valuable. Even in the Bible, St. Paul shows his value of Roman citizenship because he's able to redress his grievances to the emperor, which is something a non-citizen could not do. So it's something everybody wanted, right? And I think if that's actually very similar to if you look at how America is on the world stage, maybe not as much anymore because we've created a lot of people who don't like us, but a lot of people like the benefits of what you can have to be here in America.
Sure.
And for Rome, there was actually a lot of social programs, believe it or not. The number one is the grain or the corn dole. So there was a certain amount of food that everyone was given. And typically, it's going to be more in the empire period where it shifts to Egypt. But typically, the breadbasket of the Roman Empire is Egypt. And so that's kind of where the actual supply would come from. And it's kind of very interesting to a Cloward and Piven issue, right? Like where if you can get this welfare state that gets so big it's paying for a lot of people, eventually you can kind of ruin the currency. So that's one part of it, is social programs. People want those things. But you also wanted the control that being in Roman government could give you, because being a Roman citizen, you could hold government positions. Even if others in your territory weren't citizens, but you were in a Roman province, right, a territory controlled by Rome but not Roman, if you had citizenship, you could control that area. So that's another really important thing. And what's going to end up happening is there ends up being different levels of citizenship. There's citizenship with the vote and citizenship without the vote. Citizenship without the vote comes a little bit later on, and it's very beneficial to certain emperors, like Caracalla is an important one to take note of. In 212 AD, he actually takes all the people in the provinces that are free people, right, not slaves, and gives them citizenship. So overnight, 30 million people become citizens. Now, he does this because he had bankrupted the treasury and he wants to be able to tax these people, especially their inheritance. But what does that do? Now you have people that want these welfare programs that could be accessible to them. So that's a big part of it. Now, if you want to add another thread to this, in the 160s AD, during the rule of Marcus Aurelius, you're going to have something hit called the Antonine Plague. They call it Antonine purely because it happens during the time of the Antony family, right? So during that time, 10% of the empire dies from that plague, from the Antonine Plague. So the problem you're going to have now, lack of military men. What does an army need but military men? So barbarians had always served in the Roman auxiliary, but now, as we're going into a 3rd century where, as I mentioned in this crisis, generals would raise an army and declare themselves emperor, they need more military men. So you have citizenship as a big pull. You have citizenship being given away, but you also have a driving force of needing to have a bigger military. So what ends up happening is a lot of tribes end up coming in off of the provinces, and the military-age men would join the military, but also bring their families with them. So that's one part of it.
Well, real quick, quick interlude. GOP has actually talked about this, about granting citizenship to the illegal immigrants in America if they'll enlist in the military. And, we also happen to be on the precipice of World War III, and we don't have enough troops, and all of a sudden we have all of these fighting-age males that have come across from the southern border, and now they are enlisted, and then they become American citizens. I just wanted to point that out.
Well, and that's an important point, too, because, as I mentioned, there's the distinction between the actual Roman legions, like the Roman military units, but also the Roman auxiliary.
Yep.
The auxiliary military units made up of these tribes around Rome. And what would happen early on, if you served for 20 years, you would get citizenship. And you could actually give that citizenship to your children. A lot of these guys would then go into government after retirement if they happen to live long enough to not die.
Yeah, I was like, that's tough to fight for 20 years.
Yeah, well, to fight for 20 years, you'd be lucky if you live for 3 years.
Right.
But in the later empire, that's going to move to 30 years. But you're going to start to see the auxiliary and the Roman legions becoming very close to the same thing. The differentiation starts to disappear because these military commanders just need more men in order to fight. So then what ends up happening now is you have this instability in the 3rd century of military commanders declaring themselves emperor, raising an army, and attacking each other. So what starts to happen? The provinces, the places further away from Rome, are going to fall out of Roman control. So what ends up happening in the West, you have a break-off empire called the Gallic Empire, where a Roman military general declares himself separate from Rome and creates his own empire, which is going to last around 10 years. And in the East, you have an empire called the Palmyran Empire, which breaks off and is actually run by a woman named Zenobia, whose husband was a Roman legionary. So you have this break-off empire that starts to happen. So then what happens is now generals are fighting each other. They're trying to handle these break-off empires, and I think I lost you for a second there. You're going to have generals are fighting each other. You have these break-off empires, and now you're going to have people saying, well, Rome's clean for the pickings because nobody's really stopping us. So then you start to have these barbarian invasions happen. So it's kind of weak central power starts to create a problem that creates a problem that creates a problem. And then you have how monetary policy ties into this, right? Doubling, tripling, quadrupling pay. So now money's worth nothing.
Right.
The 3rd century is a very crazy time.
When people say the barbarians at the gates, what are they talking about? And where do those barbarians come from?
So they're going to come from like what we would call Germany, France, Belgium, and there's so many different tribes.
So my people were the barbarians? Unbelievable.
Yeah, man. I'm half German too, so that's the barbarian. And then there's so many different tribes. There's the Macromani, there's the Belgae, there's the Visigoths, there's the Ostrogoths, there's the tribes from North Africa. So there's all these different tribes, and there's hundreds of different ones if you want to name them off. But you have a lot coming up from North Africa and kind of eastern Spain. You have them coming in from the ones in England are typically going to stay there and just say, get off our land. But you're going to have a lot of the ones from Germany, France, and Belgium, and a lot of these areas coming into the empire. Okay.
So you have to... Then you start to pay these soldiers more, and you end up debasing your currency further.
Correct.
Are they? Do you know if they're just minting new currency in order to pay these people? Is it backed at all by precious metals, or is it fiat at that point?
So I wrote down some stats on this too, just so I'd have them for you. I took some notes, Clint, because I want to make sure I wasn't caught off my feet on this one. If you want to look at so the silver denarius, which is kind of the main currency most people will be using, it goes from 90% to 50% by the start of the 3rd century in terms of its purity. So that means only 50% of it is silver by the start of the 3rd century. By 238, which is kind of the crescendo point of this crisis where everything goes to hell, it's at 48%. By 276, under the time of Aurelian, it's at 4%. So it's basically a bronze coin. So it's just what's happening is they're mixing any other metal they can find to keep this thing in one piece.
Right. And I hate to break it to the American people, but since 1971, we've had 0%. We've had 0% precious metals backing any of our currency. So it seems to me that we may, financially be in worse condition, particularly when you look at the national debt, 35 trillion. I mean, figures that the human mind really can't even, envision properly. And it's escalating at about couple trillion annually at this junction. I mean, it's going hockey stick. Al Gore's chart was wrong when it came to the climate, but it looks like it may be right when it comes to our debt issues. So,
well, it's interesting because I think Rome is a really interesting kind of predictor of where things can go. But I think also if you want to look at like how we're doing things more in a Weimar portion, right? Like of this paper money that's just kind of worth nothing. And by the time you get there to buy your loaf of bread, the wheelbarrow you have isn't worth enough to use it.
Right.
And I think if anything ever happens with the petrodollar, Clint, that's the danger of kind of where we're headed.
Bingo. I couldn't agree more. I think that's what these wars in recent memory are really all about. Gaddafi talked about doing a gold-backed currency. Saddam Hussein wanted to exit the U.S. dollar or trade his oil in something other than U.S. dollar. They're both dead. Vladimir Putin also basically has now bucked the neoliberal world order and been kicked off of SWIFT, and therefore is now trading in, Chinese yuan or rubles or basically anything other than U.S. dollar. But
rubles is what we get paid in, right?
Exactly. but they can't trade in the U.S. dollar because the Western apparatus, the banking cartels, have essentially kicked them off of that system. So it seems as if the U.S. State Department is expediting the process of the petrodollar now being damaged. That seems to me to be very suicidal. I mean, it seems totally reckless to me.
That's the question I have, but why would they be doing it? Because if you look at people like Victoria Nuland, who I like to call the angel of death, they're just pushing us further to people not using the U.S. dollar. My question is, why, Clint? Like, why are they kind of racing so far at that? Because do they want a global currency? Do they want a global digital currency? Like, what is kind of the point? Yeah,
well, that's a big question I have too. Is it ushering in a central bank digital currency? Do they actually work for foreign powers or supranational powers, not actually governmental powers, and they are not concerned with the downfall of America? They have already realized that it's inevitably going to fall because of the debt burden and the cultural divide and everything else that's happening here, and they're essentially shifting their power structure to, I don't know, China or some other nation. I'm not sure. I really don't know, because the distinct possibility is too, these people genuinely believe in modern monetary theory because they've gone to Keynesian psychopath school, and they don't understand that this is doomed to fail. Like, all of these are potential answers, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's bad.
I apologize though. I cut you off. You were going to ask something else.
Oh no worries. I forgot where I was going with it too now. So, anyways, we were talking about the immigration issue. So, yeah, how did they ultimately deal with? Did they ever go to the point of, like, did they have a populist right wing uprising in their empire that, like, forced their leaders to close the borders? Because I feel like that's where we're at in this current junction in the U.S.
Not really, though, because the empire is a one-party state. Like, that's the problem you have. Like, in the late republic, you're going to have two real political parties. You could call the ones the populares, or the people that do things more for a populist reason. Julius Caesar, believe it or not, though he's patrician by birth and should have been the other political party, which is called the Optimates, or the Great Ones. They were really the
what a dope name.
Oh yeah, the Optimates, Optimus Prime. Yeah. So Caesar's actually broke his entire career, and he's always borrowing money, and that's why he takes a lot of the risks he takes, because if he loses this thing, he's screwed every single time. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the reforms he makes and a lot of the way he functions is actually as a populare, or things that people think for popular reasons, and the populares and the Optimates are kind of your two political parties in the late republic. In the empire, it's a one-party state, man. It's typically not even what the emperor wants, which I think is very interesting. It's actually more of the people behind him that are most important. If you ever get a chance to dive deeper into the Praetorian Guard, they're responsible not just for protecting the emperor, but they manage the grain supply. They were in charge of a lot of spying. They were in charge of a lot of like public works type things. And the guy that was called the Praetorian Prefect, or the person in charge of the Praetorian Guard, I like to compare him to Barack Obama, is typically the one pulling all the strings. And there's 13 different emperors that are actually going to be killed by the Praetorian Guard. Wow. A lot of those because they do things. One of those
that's
being
the deep state.
Correct. That's kind of your Roman deep state in a lot of ways. To me, they're really the ones in charge. So it's when things aren't done typically the way the rich people would want, or those with power would want, they either off the emperor, or they're going to, kind of push the next policy. So it's really just a one-party state, and when you kind of outstep your lines, even the emperor doesn't get to live.
Wow. So that's the Praetorian Guard is essentially the blob, as Mike Benz describes it, like the U.S. State Department, CIA, FBI, the people that we don't elect and we don't know the names of to a large extent.
Yeah, and that's the large reason that Constantine's actually going to disband them. So not only does he change your monetary policy, he actually disbands the Praetorian Guard because he observes what they've been doing for hundreds of years.
All right, well, that's interesting. All right, so I want to delve deep on that one. How the hell does he do that? Because how does he do it and not die?
How does he do it and not die? He closes down the I forget the name of it, but basically the Praetorian Guard have their kind of their digs in the middle of the city of Rome. He actually closes it down, and he's going to actually end up removing position from the last Praetorian Prefect because he has so much military force. There's nobody that can stop him.
Okay. So he uses it's basically the military
force
junta against the deep state.
Yeah, because the rule in Rome is there's kind of this sacred boundary around Rome. It's called the Pomerium, and by Roman religion, you couldn't have arms inside the city, like any sort of like military arms, because it was like kind of a religious problem. The Praetorian Guard were exempt from this. So they could actually have weapons of war, Tim Walls, inside the city and do what they wanted with those. So that's a very, very important point. So you have these guys that have the ability to have force and they don't have competition. And this is going to be recognized by Constantine.
Wow.
But it takes a long time.
They have a monopoly on violence on a major scale. Well, I can understand why they'd be able to rule. What I don't understand, though, you said that he gets rid of their quarters, their digs. Why would they allow that? Like, if they're armed and they have, like, they just do it? They just go, okay, like, it's over. Well, or does he threatens them with his military?
Well, he threatens them with the military, but you do start to have kind of this reduction in their power over the years, right? Like, so it is much easier
he hits them at a weak point.
Correct. It is much easier to destroy a early 4th century Praetorian Guard than it is a early 2nd century Praetorian Guard, which is a very different beast. Got you.
Well, do you think that our Praetorian Guard is at its apex or denouement? Like, do you think where is it at? Because it seems pretty strong to me, but I don't know.
I think it's at its apex, man. Because if you look at it, like it's let's look just what happened with the Democratic Party. We have a candidate that no one voted for and nobody even liked her in 2020. She dropped out before the primary. She's now the second coming of Barack Obama, the anointed holy one, and we're just kind of charging in with this candidate that no one picked.
Right.
And I think
and no one really likes.
Right. And then we have this strange situation with Trump as well, like where somebody literally tried to kill the man. So it's just very interesting that those two things happen in a very similar time span.
Yeah, well, and it tells you a lot about the strength of the Praetorian Guard and their control over the media apparatus and the political apparatus, in that people don't really talk about what happened to Donald Trump. It's just like, well, they failed, and now we're all going to move on as if nothing even happened. It's crazy to witness. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, and I've made this point in the past, but like, if that same thing had happened to Joe Biden or Barack Obama or George Bush or Bill Clinton, it would be just wall-to-wall coverage for months, if not years. There would be efforts to ban guns immediately, and it's just like, they didn't even use that because, I mean, he's not their guy, but still you would expect them to try and capitalize on it. No, they didn't. They didn't, because they don't want us to talk about it anymore. They don't want it to be anywhere in our mindset as we go to the voting booth in November. They don't want us to be thinking about it anymore. I've never seen anything like this buried so successfully, so rapidly. Do you feel similarly, or am I crazy?
No, it's kind of shocking, because I was literally just talking to somebody about this the other day on my show, and if you look at it, what are we around? Like, maybe we haven't even hit 60 days yet since this thing happened. We're 7 days short of 60 days.
Yep. And
no one remembers it even happened. Like, there should be congressional hearings. This should be the entire news cycle. But instead, we're talking about joy. Like, how did we get here? Like, it's the strangest thing ever, because we're at a point where the media is so controlled. Just like messaging was in the Roman Empire. Like, if it wasn't approved by the emperor and by the Praetorian Guard, you weren't going to know about it. And I think that's what's very interesting about how tightly controlled information is.
This is something I don't know anything about, and maybe you do. What was the media landscape like? Obviously, they don't have radio, TV, electricity even. Do they have newspapers? Do they, like, how do they?
No, it's nothing like that. Like, you have to understand, like, everything in your daily life is propaganda. So, for example, the number one tool is coinage. The coins you use every single day is going to have a picture of the emperor on it. Now, it gets even grainier than that. If the emperor has a laurel wreath on, then he's really trying to show his divinity. If his eyes are looking up, then that means he's basically saying, he gives power to the gods. If they're looking straight on, then he's saying he's a god by himself. If you're looking at imagery on the reverse side of the coin, they might have, as Constantine later does, he has Christian imagery on it to show, like, hey, the empire has changed and we're looking at things this way. But early in his career, he's going to have the Egyptian sun god on it, Sol Invictus. Or you're going to see an emperor put maybe the picture of Rome's first king, Romulus, or Rome's first great emperor, Augustus, on it to kind of show their power. So coins are very interesting, and here's the reason why. The number one purpose of coins in the Roman Empire was to pay the military. So if they're receiving those coins, well, those coins have power to them, right? Because that's that face they're seeing every day, and that's the person paying them. Because what would happen is emperors typically would try to take in as many of the old coins as they could on a yearly basis and mint new ones with their own face on them and their own symbolism on them and things like that. Because they wouldn't just be like, oh, this is a 1975 coin. No, they destroyed all those and they made new ones. So the reason you're finding them is because maybe they got left someplace or somebody stored some in their home, like, what happened with Pompeii. If Pompeii gets covered up and whatever's there, you're going to know that it's there. Or maybe some got taken into Germany and we find them in the ground there. So typically the only reason we're finding them is because they weren't in circulation. If they're in circulation, they're typically getting in every year. They're minting new ones. They're putting the emperor's face and whatever other things that need to be on it to convince people. And they're using that on a daily basis, right? So the money has so much power. Now, if you want to look as well, in my schooling, the main thing I actually studied was the propaganda of Augustus Caesar, the first emperor of Rome. And he actually created kind of this worship cult of where people worship the emperor for almost 500 years. And one of the first things he does, in addition to making sure his face is on every piece of money, is he puts statues of himself over the entire empire.
Are you ready to start building wealth by putting your precious metals to work? Silver isn't just a precious metal, it's a tangible asset and a great way to diversify any investment portfolio. And with monetary metals, you don't just own physical silver, you own silver that works for you to generate more silver, growing your total ounces over time. And right now, you can earn 12% annual interest on silver paid in silver in their latest offering if you're an accredited investor. Click the link in the description or head to monetary-metals.com/lockdown to learn more. Monetary Metals is revolutionizing the way you invest in gold and silver. This is the first true silver bond since 1834. You can earn a 12% annual interest on silver paid in silver, but you must be an accredited investor to participate. It's a 3-year term, and the bond is financing a publicly traded mining company located in the western United States. Head to the link in the description or go to monetary-metals.com/lockdown for more information on how to participate. Do not let the Roman Empire become you. You become your own sovereign, and you can do so with monetary-metals.com/lockdown. Check it out.
And those statues are always about age 40. In later life, they always thought Augustus was going to die on a yearly basis because he's not healthy. But outside of the city of Rome, people thought that Augustus was this young, healthy, vibrant guy. And because he created this image of every time people saw him. Most people would never see their emperor, but they would see statues and they would see these different projections of them. Another thing as well is kind of the gladiatorial fights and things like that were a really big draw as well. And after about, I think it's the late 70s AD, Vespasian is actually going to take the money he earns by conquering Jerusalem and using that to build the Flavian Amphitheater that we know as the Colosseum. So this is another thing where the emperor's higher than everyone else. You have the thumbs up and thumbs down that comes basically because that would be after the end of a gladiator fight. They would decide if we're going to kill someone or not. Believe it or not, it's reverse. Thumbs up meant kill him. Thumbs down meant spare him. So there's so many of these different things that were controlling people's daily lives. So much of your reality was controlled.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So essentially, the people. It's like symbology propaganda more than it is written or media propaganda. Like they don't have that.
Yeah, because I think here's the thing that's interesting, Clint, is if you look at like, I think the Kardashians are a great example of this. I apologize for mentioning the Kardashians on your show.
That's all right.
But if you look at it,
that's a first.
let's look at this, right? They're kind of like modern divinities in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Most people are never going to see them. If they do, they're going to be like, oh my God, the Kardashians, I'm in the same room as them. You know, they have millions of followers on social media, but they have this separation from regular people, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of a divinity in a lot of ways. It's a very similar thing to how Roman propaganda would work. You would create this separation between you and others, because if there's a separation, well, you must be better than them. And I think that's what's very interesting. You see a lot of the same power plays and symbology used in the exact same ways.
Interesting. Yeah, well, more similarities to the Roman Empire. Bummer. All right, so the currency of where do you think it gets interesting for the libertarian hard money audience in terms of comparing it? Actually, before we go there, I know I keep delaying this.
No, it's fine. I keep bouncing too, so I apologize.
Yeah. No, I keep delaying this, but if there is a cognate, if there is a comparison to be made to Donald Trump's role in whatever phase of Rome you'd like to evaluate or compare, I'd love to hear it. Is there a Donald Trump figure at all?
Oh, that's tough, man, because there's a lot of different characters you could try and compare Trump to, right? You could say, oh, he's Gaius Gracchus who wants to have this popular uprising, and then the people kill him, right? Which happens in kind of around I think the early 130s BC.
Well, we were 1 inch away from that coming true. So
I think the biggest comparison the media wants to make is Julius Caesar. Is the one they always want to say, you know, Trump is the next Caesar. If you Google image search for Trump and Caesar, oh man, there's some really interesting artwork that all these like people like the Atlantic have put together. It's a lot of fun. But I think
I've seen some of those. Yeah,
there's some similarities, but there's some major differences. You know, if you look at Caesar, he's the most brilliant military tactician of his time. No new wars during Trump. Can I point that out? He wasn't really a great military tactician because he wasn't really fighting anybody. Caesar doesn't lay down power. Trump may not have agreed with the election results, but he lays down power. But if you want to look at what caused Caesar to take the actions he takes, it's actually quite similar to what's happening to Trump. And I think that's the interesting part to it. In 59 BC, Caesar holds the office of consul. Consul is kind of like being president, but there's two of them at the exact same time because they wanted these colleagues to share power rather than one person having power. So his colleague would have been this guy named Marcus Biblius. And Caesar has this guy that's kind of like his mortal enemy, and his name's Cato the Younger. And that happens because early in Caesar's career, there's an uprising and a revolt against the Republic, and called the Saturninus is the guy that kind of like leads this uprising. And Caesar's the judge in charge, and he lets these guys off, and Cato's not very happy with this. So he decides no matter what, the rest of his career is going to block everything Caesar does. So in 59 BC, when Caesar's consul, he manages to get this other guy, Marcus Biblius, to be the colleague of Caesar. And typically what you would do is you would call the consulship the year of those two individuals. So the consulship of Caesar and Biblius is what it should have been known as. Historically, and probably during that time, people would have called it the consulship of Julius and Caesar. Because basically he figures out a way to have supreme power pretty much by himself publicly. Now, privately, that's a different case.
Okay.
But what happens is Caesar tries to do these populist reforms. The first one being there's a lot of public land in Rome that's supposed to be like owned by the country, but a lot of the rich people are actually just having their own farms on them and just kind of ignoring like who actually that the state owns it. Mm-hmm. And Caesar wants to take this land and instead give it to veterans after they come back from war because a lot of them are broke and they don't really have pensions. So his first reform is to take public land and give it to troops. Now, Cato the Younger doesn't like this and Biblius doesn't like this. So they actually managed to veto this and not let it happen. Now, there's a power that Caesar would have held called the tribunician power. And that allows him to take this vote, even though it had been vetoed, and bring it to the actual people of Rome to vote on it. So the people of Rome vote on it and they say, yeah, we want free land. That sounds great. So that ends up being what happens. So now people get really mad at Biblius and get really mad at Cato. So armed people actually chase Biblius into his home. And he doesn't leave his home for an entire year. Like I'm sure he left at some point, but publicly he didn't leave his home.
Wow.
So they end up calling it the consulship of Julius and Caesar rather than Biblius and Caesar. Now there's a private agreement between Caesar, Rome's richest man, Marcus Crassus, and Rome's most powerful general, Pompey the Great. This is called the First Triumvirate. So this private agreement decides everything, but Caesar in his public persona is the one enacting everything. So that happens for 1 year. Then after the 1 year, his consulship is up, and he goes and serves as a proconsul. So that basically means a consul outside of the city of Rome. And this is when he goes to Gaul for 9 years, kills close to 1 million people, and brings a lot of territory into Rome. At the end of this time period, he hears kind of through the grapevine on his way back to the city, Cato the Younger has these crimes through the corruption courts that he wants to bring Caesar up on. And Caesar's like, well, they weren't crimes when I did them. What are you talking about? And so he comes through northern Italy with these 10 legions. He arrives at this river called the Rubicon, leaves 9 of his legions there, takes one of them across, and enters the city of Rome. So Cato and Pompey, who's no longer friends with Caesar, and any of Caesar's detractors actually run away from the city and let him have the city. And that's kind of how Caesar ends up just taking over. They call his bluff, and he says, all right, well, I have the army. Trump doesn't do anything like that, but it's actually very similar, right? You want to bring him up on charges, do all these different things, push him, see what happens. And I think it's interesting how Trump's kind of just surrendered himself to the process, which has been very interesting, whereas Caesar's like, well, I've got the bigger military guys. Let's see who can call their bluff here.
Right. Well, that is very interesting, and this actually ties into the letter that shall not be named anon thesis about Donald Trump. That in fact he has the military.
Oh no!
No, I mean,
no! Let's not. I have one friend that still every day he sends me texts and tells me Trump is in control. I'm like, come on, man. No,
I agree with.
This is a really bad plan.
I agree with you. It's nonsense. I'm just saying like that. If by some chance that were to be true, then he really would be Julius Caesar, because then he really does have the military on his side, and that's why he's surrendered himself to the system. Is that he's like, he has total faith that at the end of the day he's going to be all right. I don't buy it at all. I just want to.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think so. He's. It's interesting because if you look at the career of Trump, like, he's always loved the media. They've always hated him. So exactly. I think he just kind of keeps thinking, oh, if I just do more media, if I do more interviews, eventually they're going to like me. And it's like, no, Donald, they don't like you anymore, man.
Right. Well, I mean, he did spend 40 years in the limelight. It's hard for him to adjust to the fact that, like, no, bro, like, they genuinely have turned you into the devil. Like, I don't think he gets it. And in not just in their audience's minds, but in some of their minds, they've drank their own Kool-Aid, and they've convinced themselves that this guy that they liked more or less for 30 plus years, now he's their arch enemy. It's bizarre.
And to my friends that do continually tell me to trust a really bad plan that's out there, if it does eventually go in your favor, well, hey, man, I'd prefer you're right, but it just doesn't look that way.
Exactly. I will apologize if I'm proven wrong. Here's the Daily
That's
Beast.
My favorite one. The one, if you scroll up in the upper left-hand corner, that one. That's the best one.
Yeah, there you go.
Politico.
Lots of comparisons here. So anyways, I just wanted to show that, since you said that there is a lot of
there's been some comparisons to him to Diocletian as well, who's kind of the famous reformer in a lot of ways. But the thing that ends up happening with Diocletian is he's kind of the medieval model for kingship, because the Roman Empire divides into two periods, which is the Principate, or the kind of the early empire. It comes from Caesar. When he becomes the first emperor, he doesn't say, hey, guess what, guys, I'm emperor now. He takes this title called princeps, or it translates roughly to first citizen. So it's kind of like,
I've always read it and I always said princeps. I didn't know how to pronounce it.
Well, it's in Latin, a lot of times you pronounce your C's are just hard. So that's funny, your C's are hard. But he takes this title of princeps. So they call kind of the early empire the Principate after kind of this princeps character. The model that changes under Diocletian, he's gonna take the title of dominus, or lord, and that's where the late empire is typically called the dominate, because it comes from the title of dominus. So what you're really going to see is this significant separation of the emperor from the people. Opulence. He's wearing purple. He's wearing a diadem crown all the time. So it is a giant difference. But he has these monetary reforms, all of which fail, by the way. He tries to reform the gold coin, that fails. He tries to reform the silver coin, that fails. He tries to institute something Kamala Harris wants to do, which is price controls, and it just feeds the black market and drives inflation even harder in the 280s. So there's people that want to also compare him, and I've frankly made that comparison before as well, but I think kind of the more I've read about his policies, I don't see Trump doing anything like that, and I also don't see naming himself a lord of the United States.
No, I mean, contrary to what the media says about the guy, that he envisions himself a king, I've never got that vibe from him at all. He's wielded power in a very tepid way, in fact.
Yeah. It's very different than somebody like an FDR or Woodrow Wilson, who I would say have kind of been like American kings in a lot of ways.
But let's be honest. I think that the reason that they got away with that is because they were doing the bidding of the establishment. He's not. Like, he's actually going against their will and their demands. At least that's how I view these things.
I agree.
Quick comparison that I've always found interesting, and the bread and circuses, the gladiator battles. The comparison to fantasy football, the unbelievable ride or die nature of most fighting age men when it comes to their fanship to their sports teams, whether it be collegiate or professional. How do you see comparisons between kind of our fanfare for our athletes versus kind of gladiators back then?
Well, the one thing you have to understand in Rome, they're kind of, I think chariot teams are kind of the best comparison to this.
Okay.
So their chariot teams had colors. They were the reds, the blues, the greens, and there's more that are added later on, but there's 4 to begin with, and they kind of add more later on. There's a gold faction that's added, but then that gold faction is removed. But these were actually more like political parties. A lot of times what would happen is your street gangs would come from these chariot races.
Yeah, what you claim, blood.
Correct. So
red versus blue.
So I think it's really interesting if the kind of the red versus blue environment we have today is actually quite similar to how people would have looked at things, especially in the early empire. In the late empire, they're not going to care as much because everything's kind of falling apart. But in your early empire, and I'm talking like around like, the year 0 to probably around like, 117 is kind of your heyday of a lot of this stuff. And it's at a grand scale where, if there's a chariot race or a gladiator battle, everyone's going there. They're not just going there. They're spending money they don't have to bet on a lot of these things. So it is kind of all encompassing. The thing I think is interesting is it's hard to understand what a politician or an emperor is doing to you when you're, number one, not just stuck in these entertainments, but you're also living the battle of daily life to try and survive, which that in itself is just difficult. So it's like, how do you actually understand what's happening around you, especially when there is no real media to speak of, which sure we have a media, but it doesn't inform us of anything.
Yeah, I mean, we may be worse off because we're misinformed.
Yes and no, and I think X and Rumble have become a big part of that. For those, I still don't 100% trust Elon, but
of course, no. I mean, for those that are actually interested in finding the truth, it's never been easier. I mean, you actually have access to whatever you want to look at. The problem is that the majority of people are still looking at actual overt propaganda and they don't even know it. So that's the reason I say it may be worse off. But I agree. Yeah, I would not go back, certainly.
I think somebody like my dad is a good example of this. My dad, he's going to be 71 soon. And his entire life, he's voted for Democrats. And he showed up to my house last week with his clean up on aisle 46 bumper sticker and his MAGA hat. So it's like,
wow.
I do think in a lot of ways, you're regular people, and my dad has no interest in politics whatsoever. He just voted Democrat because he's a factory worker, and that's what you do.
Sure.
And so I think we are starting to see a shift where regular people are starting to see through a little bit.
Yeah, well, I sure hope you're right. Just one more quick tangent, and then I'm just going to take the cuffs off you and let you talk monetary stuff. Did they know? Like, did they refer to themselves as living in year 0 at that time?
No, that's a kind of a Christian idea of how we use.
Okay, I thought so.
After everything happens, we kind of use. As I mentioned, like they called it the consulship of Julius and Caesar, and they would have called it the consulship of. It should have been called the consulship of Caesar and Biblius.
Right.
That's actually how they dated their years. So if you look at, have you ever seen? If you go to the middle of Rome, there's the Pantheon, and there's kind of that Latin phrase in the front of it. It translates roughly to Marcus Agrippa, son of Lucius, built this in his first consulship. So typically you would do it by, it was the first time Agrippa was consul, or it was the second time this person was consul, or that's how they did their years, and also their calendar was very out of whack. One of the major reforms that Caesar does is in his first year as dictator is he reforms the calendar, because they would get to the end of their year, and after a few years, they realized they were like missing 30 days because their calendar was built on like 350 days. So he actually institutes the 365-day calendar with the extra day for leap year every 4 years. So he tries to kind of fix the calendar because it'd be like the middle of spring and they think it was winter because like the calendar was so out of whack.
Oh man. What a disaster. Don't ever allow yourself to be ruled by dictators. Anyways, where would you like to wrap us up? Like, take it wherever you'd like with the financial stuff.
Well, as I mentioned, I've taken a lot of notes on this because I know your audience cares about this, and I also wanted to. I came to you with this idea. I'm like, dude, I want to talk monetary policy. I think it's very interesting because the thing that I had brought up to you last time, and I'd since talked about. I know Ron Paul's talked about this for years. Like the guy that, if we get on a gold standard, the guy that does it probably isn't going to be that popular, but it's kind of the pill we have to swallow in order to do it.
Yep.
The problem we're going to have is we're so far over our skis. So the thing I think is really interesting is if you look at, once again, and I don't even know if he knows that he was doing this when he did it, but if you look at the reforms of Constantine, as I mentioned, the original gold coin is called the Aurelius, and it comes from kind of the three coin system that Augustus had, which was gold, silver, and bronze. Sounds just like medals at a track event. But the Aurelius was equal to 24 silver denarii, right? So if you had one of those, you're in really good shape. So what ends up happening is they don't really do anything to the Aurelius. Like, it really maintains its value, but people start hoarding it and not spending it at all. So the only thing that's really traded is the silver denarius. So that ends up being the things that they're adding more metals to. So this kind of causes inflation to go nuts because they're losing gold in invasions. They're they're building it into temples and they're hoarding it. They're not actually spending it. So the gold isn't changing hands. So inflation goes, in a really, really crazy direction. So then what ends up happening is Constantine takes a look at this, and it's around 314 or 315 in a city called Trier in Germany, and he mints somewhere around 100 gold coins. We don't know if that's the exact amount, and every year he's going to start minting more gold coins. Now, as I had mentioned, there's a problem of people hoarding them. So what does he try to do? He actually unties the value of gold to other currencies and gives gold purely its value on its own.
So he lets it float.
Correct. He lets it float, and it basically says in the marketplace, gold is worth the value of gold. So it gives it that value. But now what does he do? He tries to force it into circulation. So he requires all taxes to be paid in gold. So now if people have to pay taxes in gold, if they see gold as value, they're going to start using gold. He tries to force it in circulation.
He accidentally creates a gold standard. He's not really trying to. He's
Correct.
just trying. Yeah. That's
correct.
fascinating.
But as I said, it's fascinating as he does it. Now, what does he start to do? If Constantine's famous for being the first Christian emperor, now he doesn't really live as a Christian. He gets baptized on his deathbed, if you want to believe that, however it comes from. But one of the things he starts doing is he starts actually taking all the gold out of the pagan temples. So now we have more gold for coins, right? It used to be just statues before. Now it's gold for coins. So he's minting more gold coins this way. So we're getting more coins in circulation. So it's another source that's happening. He also starts invading other territories again. So that's more gold coming into the empire. So he's trying to bring in as much gold as he can, minting a few more gold coins every single year, requiring taxes to be paid into it. And so he doesn't really intend to do it, but he actually creates a gold standard, and it's a 24 karat gold coin. It's about 6.3 ounces of pure gold, and
Dude,
it lasts until about
gold coin.
It's a big gold coin. It's kind of like a medallion is what they end up calling it.
Yeah, for real.
But it ends up being this solidus ends up being the main coin that's used until about the year 1000. So like it's one of the main reasons the East survives, and I think it handles. Once again, I don't know if this was his intention, but like, let's say if we did go on a gold standard gradually over the next 25 years, well, maybe that could start to handle some of our problems. Now, the problem we would also have to handle, Clint, is that a lot of our, because we're not exactly like Rome, but a lot of our, factories and production and things like that aren't here. We would also have to handle economics and things being produced here. So I think it is kind of interesting if you look at like, we can't just have day one gold standard or everything's going to crash.
I agree.
I think the gradualness of it, though, I don't know if it was his intention or not, is one of the major things that helps.
No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And like every libertarian we always think about like if I had the button put in front of me, would I end the fiat standard, overnight? And it's like I probably would, even though I know it would be a cataclysm. Just because I think that fiat is like pure evil and it's constantly draining the lifeblood of the economy and of the American people and the people of the world. But if I had my druthers, I would prefer to do it over 10, 15 years. I mean, like if I could do that, I could actually assist the economic system in transferring over to this without it ending up with riots and people starving and all sorts of craziness. So that's super interesting. By the way, 6+ ounces of gold, for those that don't know.
A lot of gold.
It's enormous. I mean, that would be like that. Just depending on how thick it is, obviously. But I can't even imagine that a normal laborer would
Okay, so
even
I'm going to correct
possess...
myself on that, Clint, because that's my notes say 6.3 grams. I apologize, which is very different than ounces.
Okay. I was like,
I apologize
Jesus
to your
Christ.
audience that just freaked the F out on that. No, 6.3 grams.
That makes way more sense. All right, so
because as I mentioned, I did special research just for this conversation to make sure I had all the data on it.
It made me excited. I was like, I want one of those motherfuckers. Like
6.3 grams.
I know, but I want the 6.3 ounce Roman gold coin. Like if those exist at all, they would be so valuable today. I mean,
well, and just to give people an idea, like the average Roman worker, their monthly like take home would be like one gold solidus. So like they'd be getting like 12 to 15 of these in a year. So they're extremely valuable.
This is exactly what I was going to ask when I thought it was the ounces, because I was like, I bet that's like an annual salary for most people, I would think. So anyways, I'm glad we cleared that up.
We do make mistakes, and that's why I showed up with notes on this one.
Exactly. We don't want to misinform people. Anyways, Jeremy, this has been awesome. Go ahead and tell people where they can follow your work and delve deeper.
Yeah, so my company is Command Your Brand, and we actually help people to appear on shows just like this, because I think free speech is the number one thing we can have, and we actually only support free speech companies, and because I think the number one thing is these conversations happening. So if you want to connect with us or connect with me, I put together a great resource if your audience wants to check this out to figure out how to actually get free speech out to themselves. It's called Command Your Empire. So if you head over to commandyourempire.com, you can grab that. And I'm at Jeremy Ryan Slate on all platforms, not because I'm a deranged serial killer, but because my parents named me after a cowboy actor also named Jeremy Slate.
Well, I was named after Clint Eastwood, so I get it.
Oh, that's a better name, man. Like they named me after like some B actor from Atlantic City that has New York Times articles.
My mom just loved Clint Eastwood, so she's like, Clint, that's such a unique. She's like, that's such a unique, strong name. We're gonna just name him Clint. It's cool because like now it's just me.
It was like short for Clinton or something like that. It's just
no,
Clint.
no, it is.
Oh, okay.
It's Clinton, but
okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Clinton Eastwood. That'd be weird. But yeah, she's always called me Clint, and it's just me and it's me, Clint Eastwood, and a bunch of black dudes from the South. Like that, those are all the Clints that I know. Anyways, man, thank you so much. This has been super interesting. I'm sure my audience will find it fascinating. Despite my severe autism, Rome has never been the thing that I've deep dived. I've always looked at more modern history. I've always been more interested in like 100 to 200 years ago. I've never gone, thousands of years back and really made it a passion of mine. So this has been, as you could tell, I'm quite the novice, and this was, very, very informational for me. But I hope it wasn't too rudimentary that it bored you.
No, and the thing I try to handle, Clint, is number one, I don't have any ideas that I'm the smartest person in every room I walk into. And as I mentioned, I even did extra research for this conversation because I want to make sure I had the data. I'm a regular guy that loves history and wants to understand it. And I did happen to have a degree in it, but I'm not the smartest person in every room I walk into, and I'm trying to learn about this stuff just as much as you guys are to really understand it.
Yeah, well, I learned a lot, and I'm sure my audience did, even though they're probably much more wonky and have already deep dove on Rome. But this was super, super interesting to me, so I hope people enjoy it. If you guys did, please do hit the like button, subscribe, and share it around with your friends and family so that they can also figure out why we may be an empire in decline. We'll see you guys soon. Peace.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?